Hello, welcome to another edition of Scaling Up, the podcast that talks about all things business, all things scaling up. And we're getting quite serious today. We're talking about addiction and substances. I guess generally, but obviously because we talk about business, it's kind of in the workplace and how it affects people's perceptions of it. Is it a real problem? Is it a problem that people think is a problem, but don't know? And it's obviously one that's close to my heart. I'm quite open about my struggles with addiction, and so for me, it's quite a passionate, or something I'm quite passionate about as well, in terms of how we address that as business owners, as people within business, as people working with businesses, and just in general as well. I think the stigma that's still attached to it is still quite prevalent, and I think that stigma is very much a barrier to helping people. I think it's a barrier within businesses as well to actually helping themselves, because if someone does struggle with addiction and you end up having to get rid of them, there's a massive cost involved in that as well, and a headache, rather than maybe being proactive and helping people up front. So yeah, it's quite a deep topic really when you start getting into it.
It is, and I think we're doing it because we're going against the grain, and what is it? International World Beer Day is on the 7th of August.
7th of August, I think we said it was.
So yeah, we'll probably be publishing this podcast around that time. But because
and
we're against International Beer Day.
Kick the table over. And I think that's part of the challenge for me, is that society is so geared up towards substance abuse. And I think that taking a step back, when we talk about addiction, your mind immediately goes to drugs and probably alcohol. But there's so much more to addiction. It's any kind of addictive behaviours, isn't it? It could be food, it could be shopping, it could be sex, it could be drugs, it could be, there's all sorts of things that sit in that. And when you do some sort of research into it biologically, the reason that people turn to, whether it be substances or behaviours, is usually as a result of removing themselves from themselves almost. It's about those those responses to, I don't want to be in myself at the moment, therefore I'll do something that takes my mind away or takes me away from it, and then that can be quite destructive. But yeah, going back to the societal side of it, we geared up, we push people into these behaviours, don't we? And we've had this conversation I think before, that talk about International Beer Day coming up. It's almost like, go on, you wouldn't have International Cocaine Day or International Heroin Day, but what's the difference?
Yeah. And I have a real problem with the whole drugs and alcohol, because to me alcohol is a mind altering substance that is legal, so it's seen as okay. And I know a lot of businesses, we were talking the other week, you'd been at an event where they were giving away free alcohol, but it was a work event. And for me, I find it quite difficult that we expect businesses to hold people to account for behaviours that they are ultimately displaying because they've consumed a substance which wasn't designed to be moderated, wasn't designed to be, kind of have one glass of wine. Like you say, even like when we put events on, like I know lots of businesses who'll be like, we've got a free bar, or we're giving you drink tokens, and everyone's like, yay, best thing ever. But then if something happens, then we're expecting them to kind of regulate their own behaviour when they're taking a mind altering substance, albeit it's one that's legal, it's one that's pushed in society.
Absolutely,
but you wouldn't
actively encouraging people.
But like you say, you wouldn't have it if you were saying, oh well, there's like a load of cocaine or a load of heroin, we've just put all that on for free at a business event, like people would be horrified. But you don't when it's alcohol, and it's to me like it's a drug, it's just legal. So
you referred to the event I was at recently, and that the case in point, it was a day event, so there was no overnight thing, and it was in the middle of the afternoon, he's like, here's a table full of drinks, help yourselves to it. And then when it wasn't all gone, the organisers were saying, come on everybody, don't leave all this free drink here, and encouraging people to drink. And then everyone was getting in the cars afterwards and driving home. And to me it was like, and I see it from a different lens, I know I'm very conscious of that, but I was like, why do we do that? And look at what's just happened the last few weeks with the World Cup. There's an expectation that there's an evening game or a late game, everybody's going to be drunk.
Yeah.
And therefore we have to be careful of that in work and what. So societally, you know, we don't help the situation because we push the expectation that alcohol particularly has to accompany everything. You know, whether it be a celebration or a commiseration, it's, you know, we deal with it with alcohol. And I think, you know, in the workplace, particularly then, you know, that causes obvious problems then if everyone's up all night, you know, being encouraged to drink and then they're not turning up for work the next day, and as you just alluded to, then what do you do? Because you've encouraged people to do these behaviours, and then when they turn up to work and they're not fit for work, it's a very fine line then, isn't it, between how you manage that.
Yeah, and we did an article about the World Cup particularly, or any sort of major sporting events around, like, yes, people might want to vary their hours of work. They might want to watch certain things at certain times. They might want to come in a bit later the next day. And there is an aspect of people will do what they'll do. So try and be inclusive. And I guess prevention's better than a cure. And, you know, rather than, I think I only had one this year where a client rang and said someone had phoned in sick the day after watching an England match. But it does happen. And I think, you know, putting it out there, I spoke to a client a few weeks before the tournament started, or maybe I think it might have been the first England game, and they said we're a bit worried, and I said put something out there now that says, look, we get that that's happening, we don't want to stop you from enjoying yourself, but again, you know, the bit that like doesn't sit well with me is enjoying yourself means getting smashed. But like we don't want to stop that, but either tell us if you want to book the day off or tell us if you want to come in later, and we'll try and work around it, because not everyone will. Some people, you know, won't take an interest in it, and therefore, you know, if you can cover shifts and whatever without like kind of worrying that, you know, everyone's sort of going to phone in sick, then that's better than having the alternative, which is people phoning sick and you find out they were out the night before, and then you're in a different conversation.
Yeah, because everyone uses Facebook and puts pictures of themselves.
You're usually in a disciplinary conversation.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where there's blurred lines as well, because there's a big difference between almost just drinking culture and then when it tips over into addiction and addictive behaviours. And from a workplace point of view, it's how do you recognise that? Because it's really difficult. Because again, we've probably all worked with or know people who really like a good drink, and we know what they get up to at weekends. But you know, it's more of a habit, or more just because that's just what they want to do, as opposed to they're addicted to that substance and they can't not do it. And I think from the worker point of view, it's when you do find yourself in that situation, because no one wants to be an addict, no one plans to be an addict. Usually, you know, again, I can use my own experience there. It wasn't until right at the very end point, it was like, oh my God, I think I've got a problem here. A month before that, you were just having a lovely time. I'm in control of this. You know, this is absolutely fine. I you know what's going on, until the point you don't. So no one plans to do that, and then when you do get to that point, it's like, what do I do now? Now where do I go? Because again, take it outside the workplace just for a second. You know, there's not a lot advertised in terms of where you go to find help for things like addiction. So you find yourself stuck in a bit of a, I don't know what to do here. And the last thing I'm going to do is walk into work and put my hand up and say, I've got a problem. And you know, this again, my view, I know we've talked about this, is part of that is that I don't trust work to help me. And the reason I don't trust them is because I've read the handbook. And the handbook tells me in the drug and alcohol policy, if I'm caught taking drugs or under influence, I'm going to get sacked. So why would I put my hand up and go, I've got a problem? Because immediately I know that well, according to the handbook, how that's going to be taken, and I'm probably going to lose my job. As opposed to in the handbook where it should say, if you think you've got a problem, here's some numbers. Here's some places you can go. There's we have mental health first aiders in work a lot now. We talked about mental health in a couple of episodes ago. But you know, who's the addiction first aider? And that's probably a step too far maybe at the moment, but why not? You know, why isn't it somewhere you can go to and go, confidentially, I've got a problem, what can I do? And how can we help that person? and then, you know, put my work hat back on again, the manager hat on. Surely it's better to do that and to help somebody and get them back being productive and a good member of staff than lose them or to sack them and then have to go through the whole, you know, there's a person missing and therefore, you know, there's an impact on whatever their role is and everyone that sits around them. And then we have to recruit and there's a recruitment cost and then there's a bedding in period cost and all that kind of thing. Is surely we deal with the root cause and we help people at that point. But I go back to the stigma thing, you know, there's a stigma from both sides and there's a stigma of I can't put my hand up because I'm going to get sacked. And then there's if you've never been in addiction or known an addiction, again, societally we think, so what? It's your own problem. You know what I mean? It's like, well, just stop. Just don't do it anymore. And if you could do that, we would have done it. You know, it's like, and again, that comes for me down to the education piece of around addiction is what is addiction? How do people get into addiction? And why can't you just stop? You know, there's you know, we could probably talk about this for a couple of hours probably and still not scratch the surface of how addiction works. But yeah, I think there's got to be a better way, and for me the better way starts with things like this, is actually having a really open conversation about it and saying this happens. There are people in your workplace, if you've probably got more than 10, 20 people in your workplace, one of them is probably struggling with some sort of addiction or someone very, very close to them is. You know, as I say, I'm very open about my sort of past struggles. And the reason to do that is because it generates this conversation. And very, very rarely, in fact, I would probably say, I could probably count on 2 fingers the amount of people I've had this conversation with and someone hasn't said, I know a brother or sister or husband or wife, my dad, my mum or whatever. It affects so many people and yet it's still so stigmatised that people don't want to talk about or admit there's a problem.
Yeah. And I think, I know we've talked about this, I don't resonate with like the addiction side, but what I do resonate with is that like this grey area drinking, like you said before, we all know someone who likes a good drink. And I think to all intents and purposes, when I was a drinker, and I haven't drank for 7.5 years, but when I was a drinker, I was very much a good time drinker, and that's what people would have seen. And I, you know, I was always out every weekend. You know, I had loads of different friend groups. There was always something going on. You know, I was the first one to be like, well, get a wine. And, you know, it was always like comical. But actually, what, you know, like the impact on mental health for me was quite big, but it was this, you could either identify as an addict or you were an okay drinker. And I was always in this grey area. I wasn't like and like you said, there's this stigma and this caricature of it, like you were Phil Mitchell getting up and putting vodka on your cornflakes. And I was like, that was never me. I wasn't ever drinking in the morning. But once I started drinking, I was out, you know, and if I had to go out on a Friday after work, I was drinking all weekend then, and I'd be rough on the Monday and I'd see it through, and then I'd slowly, as the week went on, be ready to, you know, get on it again the following weekend. And that was how I drank. But it was like a horrible time in terms of my own anxiety. I would drink to blackout. So sometimes I'd wake up and be like, I don't remember coming home. And that, you know, I hear so many people who say that. But because there's this very black and white view of it, you're either inactive addiction and like you're putting vodka on your cornflakes or you're waking up and reaching for a bottle, or how I drank was how most people describe drinking, and they're like, oh it's you know, it's not a problem, it's but actually for me, I was like, there were times when I didn't remember how I'd got home. There were times I'd be home without a bag, without a phone. There were times my neighbours knocked on the door and said, you've left the key in the other side, and I'd just let myself in. You know, and I just think, God, like I really probably put myself in danger a lot, and also just couldn't remember. So then, you know, and there'd be times where you'd check your phone and there'd be, you know, messages from people, are you okay? What went on last night? And I'd be like, got a clue. And and that scared me, because there's, you know, in my everyday normal life, I'm like to think I'm quite, you know, a nice, like caring, compassionate, on it, know what's going on. To be out of that for like 2-3 nights a week, every week nearly, like was quite scary. But I guess like you said something earlier that made me think, I am very like, you know, I can kind of, in terms of drinking, it's not something that like necessarily everyone can sort of regulate or moderate. It's
No.
one of those things that, you know, once you start drinking, it's, you know, it is something that like can take hold and stuff. But I don't think you necessarily, this is my experience, have to say you're one or the other. You know, you're in addiction or you're not. But yeah, I've lost my train of thought. But I was thinking something before around like how I used to drink and the person I identified with as a you know, day to day who I was versus when I was drinking was a completely different like beast altogether.
You use the word caricature in that as well, which I really like, because you do become a caricature of almost yourself, don't you? You become that person that people expect. And you know, I think we were very similar there. You know, I was always the first at the bar. Any company do, I was the first at the bar. I was always the last. I was always the one getting the shots in for everybody. That kind of thing, and that became my caricature. That became
and
Jarrod. This is what Jarrod is.
The stories and stuff that you have about yourself, and like, and also it's like that meme that says something like, "There's no good story ever started with a salad" or whatever it is. And it's about like, you know, people getting drunk, and I just think, like, I remember being at a Christmas do, and I'd only worked at the company for about a month. I think I started in the November. The Christmas do was December, and I was stood at the bar with someone. And I was like, can we have, and I was counting, and I was like, I recognise him, recognise her, like all the way around the bar. I was like, to the guy behind the bar, I was like, the guy I was stood with, I was like, do they work with us? He was like, no. I was like, right, he's not having one. Then I was like, 17 Jaeger bombs to the guy behind the bar, and he was like, what? And it was like, I mean, I'm going back a few years, so it was probably about 70, 80 quid. And then I was like, to the guy, I remember handing over my card going, like, I haven't got any money for Christmas shopping. Like, literally handed it over. But thought that was dead funny the next day because, like, you know, I'd just been like, oh, look at me out drinking. And that was like my, that was my personality.
Caricature, and again, I can, you know, say similar sort of stories, but when I look back at it now and I think, what was I trying to do? Now, for me, it was very much a mask. It was because, you know, we've talked about imposter syndrome, or, you know, talked about that before, and my own sort of struggles to be comfortable in my own body, in my own me.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I was going to say before. Yeah, you said that. You know, it's often when people are sometimes trying to not be in that version of themselves, and I think that was me. I wanted to be the fun guy, but that's because I didn't like me. Yeah. So because I didn't like me, I wanted other people to like me, so I could get my validation elsewhere. You know, and that then leads into, you know, that, you know, you talk about that grey area between, do you just enjoy having a drink, or do you have to have a drink? Yeah. And again, I think it's an important point. I'm just sort of skipping around a bit there, but what is that categorization? Is what makes you an addict, and there's lots of different, you know, determining factors of that. You know, one of them is once you start, you can't stop. You know, there's no concept of one. I was definitely no concept of one. The other is, you know, the other end is the Phil Mitchell vodka in the morning on your cornflakes, and you're drinking 24/7 or taking drugs 24/7. You know, there's the binge drinking, but ultimately what it all boils down to is you can't not. For me, it's that you can't not do it. You know, you might be able to go Monday to Friday without whatever it is your substance or your addiction is, but it's always there. It's always like, I can't wait for the next thing for whatever that reason. And once you start, it's almost like, right, I'm home, I'm back. You know, and again, I think part of the problem for people is, how do you break away from that cycle of, this is what people expect me to be? And I found that really difficult. When I knew I had to do something, it was almost that FOMO. It was like, but I can't not drink. I can't not go out. Why we have a family party? I am the party. You know what I mean? There's no party without me there, and everyone expects me to do that. Now what are they going to do? Are people going to like me? Again, you go back through that. Will people like this version of me? Or so it you know, the people will resist putting the hand up and asking for help because it's scary. Because you have to then start to be yourself. And I remember when I wanted to stop drinking, I was like listening to podcasts, reading stuff, and everything said you will change your friendship groups. Like you won't still be friends with those people. And I was friends with all the people I went to school with, and all my friends I picked up along the way. And I was like, nah, that won't happen to me. And I probably speak to like 3 people now who I used to speak to. And that's not, our lives grew in different directions. Like we weren't kind of, I guess, compatible anymore. And that's not, it wasn't just because I'd stopped drinking. There was lots of different things that like we just maybe weren't right in those friendship groups anymore. But I remember thinking like, that is scary. The idea that I will, if I stop drinking, how do I go to events? How do I, I used to have friends that we used to go to the theatre, but it was always like, get a bottle of wine for the interval, or, and I was like, I remember that was my first, and that's the reason I'm saying it, my very first night out after I'd stopped drinking was to the theatre. And I thought, well, I can do this because it's the theatre. But you see it like, it wasn't just the theatre. Like, the girls I was with got a bottle of wine and we ended up in McDonald's at 3 a.m, and I'm like sober, sat in the back of a black cab. But I remember coming home from that night thinking, I did it. And I'm going to go to bed now and I know what's going on, and I've brushed my teeth and I've put my pajamas on. So it's not a case of like waking up like 5 hours later in some random flat where I've made a load of friends on a night out and gone back somewhere, and now I'm like, shit, I've got to get home, and all the stuff that like you like typically do if you're a binge drinker. And you use that word, and I was a classic binge drinker, which is where I struggle with the concept. But I think you're right, this stigma and the idea that people don't want to admit it's an issue, because I was seen as that, with all my colleagues. I remember the year I said I'm going to give up drinking, everyone was like, yeah, right, like I said it in work, and everyone was like, whatever. And I'd started on the 1st of January, so I did a dry January, and I'd sort of said to a few people, I'm going to carry it on at least for the year, because I was sort of giving myself a get out, and no one even thought I'd do that. And then as the year went on, and I had people saying to me, oh, you're still not drinking, and like no one was expecting me to one was expecting me to carry on. And then like obviously as the years have gone on and I've not drinked, and friendship groups have changed, and I've started a business, and we're doing this podcast, like life's totally evolved. I can't imagine that version of me now.
It's hard to look back into it, but I think that again, I really relate to that, the people around you bit. I always laugh at almost people taking pity on you. My uncle, bless him, I love him to pieces, and I'd seen him a couple of times, so once I stopped drinking, like you said, are you still not drinking, are you? No, mate, I'm still off it. And I remember him putting his arm around, you'll be all right, you'll be back on it soon, mate. And he was almost like, don't worry, you'll be all right. I'll be all right when I start drinking again. That was, it was like, no, if I start drinking again, I'll probably die.
And you just used a really interesting word, and you said the word pity. And I think that's this stigma, isn't it? It's, oh, you can't drink like normal people. And when we attach shame to anything and we say, I'm going to put pity on you because you can't be normal, whatever normal is. And then you start people pitying you, and then there's shame attached to that, so you don't want to admit, and then that's where people shy away from, like, there's no problem then. Like, I'm fine. And I was the same, I had loads of people saying like, oh, you're still not drinking, and it made me feel like there's something wrong with me. Even though all those people were people I went out with who drank exactly the same as me, got to blackout drunk. I used to live with a friend, and we were like known as like, everyone was like, how are you two alive? Because we would go out on a Friday, you'd see us on a Sunday, we wouldn't have remembered what had gone on in between. We used to piece the night together between us. But there was even like I say even she, and I don't want this to sound like the opposite of that, but she almost pitied me, even though I was like, you're exactly the same. I'm just making a decision not to do it anymore.
Not to do it anymore. You're right. It's that.
But it's like a.
I think sometimes within that as well, when people are in that level of, I don't know what you want to call it, whether sort of semi-addiction, is you don't want to be on your own. You don't want to be the only person that. So you want company. You you don't want company. I was very isolated, but I wanted to know other people were doing it, because then it wasn't just me. And then there's that side. Then is then when you stop, people want you to carry on because they don't want to be the only one. Then, and I think bringing it back to the workplace, it's that line, isn't it, between as an employee, whatever your position is knowing that there's some help there for you, and that you can be open and put your hand up and go, listen, I'm struggling here. The reason I'm not in every Monday morning is because I'm getting on it all weekend and I can't stop. Can you help me? And then from the workplace side, and again, I've spoke to quite a lot of people, managers, HR professionals and things, and said, if someone comes to you and says that, what you do? And they go, I don't know. Because we don't get trained in any of that. No one's ever told us if someone comes to us with addictions, what do we do? So the signposts need to be from both sides. As if someone comes to you and says, I think I've got a problem, is knowing what to do or where to signpost them.
And I think that's disappointing, because from my point of view, I'd like to think, as a HR professional and working with lots of different clients and senior leadership teams, I'd be quite clear on how to guide them through that. But even as you're saying that, I'm wondering, is that because of my own experiences?
Yeah.
So I'm much more familiar with the challenges to almost de-escalate and destigmatize that. Because to me, like, you know, and I've said it to people before, I can have a conversation because actually I've got my own experiences and I can talk about that. And even before we came on here, I think it's hard as well to admit that you are not a normal drinker, because I said, you know, from a credibility as a HR professional, I know loads of HR professionals who are like in that wine o'clock Friday culture, and they'll talk about that, and I'm like, I think if, again, that's an image that you want to create, but obviously we want to break down the stigma, and to me, you know, that isn't my experience, wasn't my experience. So I would rather have open and honest conversations and be quite candid. And I've worked with a lot of clients helping write policies, and I think there has to be a fine line, because we talked earlier, didn't we? You know, I've got clients who have, like, you know, you operate machinery. Well, you cannot have someone on site operating machinery under the influence. On the flip of that, it's not just we know it exists, but actually we're going to treat this as a conduct issue and a disciplinary issue, and you'll be sacked and out the door, like you were saying, because then people are in fear and don't want to go to the line manager. And there has to be almost an open culture and a policy that says this is about well-being, and we will help you. If you say to us, I've got a problem, we are here and we will do all the right things. We will, you know, source the right support with you. We'll give you the right time off. We'll look at rehabilitation and, you know, how we can, under the Equality Act, make sure we factor that in and make sure that, you know, you've got kind of the right support. And although under the Equality Act addiction isn't considered a disability, you know, some of the after effects of it are, and some, you know, like certainly, as I said before, there's a massive link between mental health and addiction that people are now starting to understand. So for me, it's actually, we do all the right stuff and we put all the right support in place, and we make it a culture where you can talk about it. And, you know, there's not a stigma. Same as mental health. I know we talked about that a few weeks ago. Like, if we remove the stigma, then people openly feel like they can say. And like you said, everyone I know has a problem with drink to some level. Like, I know I reckon I could count on my hand probably, and interestingly, they're probably the friends that I have now who will have 1 or 2 glasses of wine and stop. Because for me, I can go out with them for dinner and they might have a glass of wine and I might have a lemonade, and I'm not thinking, oh, we're going to get on it in a minute. Whereas friends I had before, the meal was kind of moot. It was pointless. It was like, let's get the wine in. But they're the friends now, and they're probably the ones I can count on a hand to say they don't genuinely, they will be like, you know, I have 1 or 2 wines and I've got no interest in finishing the bottle and ordering 5 more. But the rest of the people I've known in my lifetime are very much in that same space I was, which was, you know, work finishes on a Friday and you get leathered all weekend.
And again, you know, we talk about fine lines, and it's that fine line of people taking responsibility for their own action. You know, you use the forklift truck drivers, people like warehouse. You know, you've got to take responsibility for your own actions. So it can't just be a cotton wool culture where, oh, let's give everyone a cuddle and look after them. There's got to be, you know, and again, going through recovery, the emphasis in recovery is on you. You know, it's, you know, we talk about in, you know, in the anonymous programs, it's a program of action. You've got to put the action in, but the action starts with the admittance that I've got a problem. But you're only going to do that when there's an environment that allows that to happen.
And absolutely. And I think what people have got to remember is, certainly in that type of environment where you are operating machinery, or in any working environment, there's always a risk. But, you know, if you're putting people in front of a vehicle, for example, you're driving on company business, sales teams are a massive, you'll know yourself, like that culture of like go to a conference and everyone's like do it at the bar doing shots and all that kind of stuff. But then also you've got to get in your car at 8 o'clock the next morning to get to your first
taking
appointment.
Taking customers out, it's always an expectation. If you take a customer out, you take them out to get drunk.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and I think, with that, I think like you've got to take that responsibility, because ultimately there's as a statutory director of a business, also if you run your own business, you are on the hook for any like potential corporate manslaughter. So if you know people are doing that, and then you're putting them in front of a machine, putting them in a car, and there's an accident, then you're the one on the hook for it. And you know, that's how I describe it to clients sometimes, because I think, again, there are some people who've started their own business, started small, grown, and then they've got quite a big team, but they've always had this culture, and they thought it was fine when they were a small team, taking everyone out, getting drunk, like, don't worry about it, like that, that event you talked about, there's free beer on the table, like, take these drinks, and, and then get in your cars. But actually, if you're, responsible for that business and you're responsible for that behaviour, then you're also on the hook for anything that happens as a result.
For it as well,
So I think it's important from a business side to think about all those potential risks, and also to talk about the well-being aspect as well. And I always call it othering. Like, there's almost like this group of people who are like, oh, I'm fine, I drink all right. They're the others who can't drink like that. And I think, again, it's that shame, isn't it? And I think when there's a culture of that, like, people won't speak up, but actually, like, for them to say, I know that's the culture. I know the MD is always smashed every weekend, but actually, this is a struggle for me. If people don't feel like they can do that, then they're just in that cycle, like you said.
They'll never do it, So I think, just to start kind of wrapping it up a little bit, is, for me, education's really key from both sides of the coin. I think a lot of businesses would benefit from having, and there are a lot of people do it now as well. I'm connected with quite a few people on LinkedIn whose business is now educating businesses on addiction. They're going in to do talks, and there are particular industries where it's rife, in the building industry, a lot of professional services, solicitors, those kind of things, young people coming out of university and earning lots of money quite quickly, accountants, those, it's rife. So the education piece is in businesses actually investing in someone come in and talk to my people about what is addiction, how do you recognize it in yourself. And again, we've talked about that really well. Where is that fine line of I'm enjoying myself versus I have to do this, and educating people in terms of, just have a look at this, ask yourself these questions. That was a thing that got me into recovery. I went onto a website, and there was a ask yourself these questions thing, and I thought, I'll be all right. And when I answered the question, that was the thing that got me to go, I need help. Ask you 15 questions it was, and that was the thing that made me go, oh shit. So I think some more of that is asking people, ask yourself these questions, and if you're answering yes to a couple of them, you probably need to seek some help. But then the other education side is from the managerial side, if you want to call it that, of what do we do if? So if someone does answer those questions and go, I've got a problem, what do we do?
But I mean, you'll know yourself, we can't, it's this very black and white, isn't it, around like, ask yourself these questions and yes, there's a problem. But I think there's almost the area of people are drinking and think they're all right because they're not getting up and doing it every day, or they're not doing it in working hours. Also managers, we're talking about how managers handle it, but there are managers, I've always worked in that senior space, and they're the ones who will also be drinking. And I think that's where we have to make it an open conversation, because I think it's not here's the workforce who are all the ones who are going to get addicted to some sort of substance,
you're right,
and here's the leadership team who are exactly, and I think there's got to be this acceptance that there's no stigma and no shame, and it doesn't, you'll know that phrase yourself, like, it doesn't discriminate, addiction doesn't discriminate.
Absolutely not, and I think I've got a lot of friends in and around in addiction and recovery now, and I have literally got every type of person you could possibly think of. Rich people, poor people, religious people, non-religious people, men, women, young, old. You're right, it absolutely doesn't discriminate. So you're absolutely right to sort of call that out. It's not about, when I say managerial, I mean more like the business angle versus the
which you're right,
employee angle.
And I work with lots of like business owners and leadership teams every day, where we talk about how do we write policies, how do we get the right people involved, how do we look at testing. I know we've not touched on that, but a lot of drugs and alcohol policies talk about testing, either for cause or random testing, and how do we train the right people to understand those tests, interpret them, and also educate our workforce to say, this is why we might be testing your operating machinery, or we know you're going out driving on company business, and also we might be testing because we're worried about our workforce, and we know that statistically the chances are someone will be in that space, and we want to educate and make sure that we're doing the right thing from a well-being perspective. But also, if we are testing, we'll do everything we possibly can, but if you don't help yourself, then obviously there are consequences. And I think that's how I always advise businesses to position that, because I don't think it's a kind of a one size fits all, and nothing is with a policy. We
No, of
talked
course
about
it's not.
policies, I think, last time. It's a framework, and it kind of gives you a bit of a flow chart and a guidance, but ultimately every single case will be different. And like you said, there'll be all sorts of different people, from someone who's very junior, new to the career, all the way up to CEOs who are experiencing problems. And it's, again, taking away that stigma to have a candid conversation with people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So again, we could probably carry on talking about this for the rest of the day. We probably have to wrap it up at some point. But I think to sum it up for me, it's that empathetic view of addiction, that people in addiction aren't there because they're enjoying it. And if they could stop, they would. It's how do we help people? How do we help them to be more comfortable with putting their hand up and asking for help? And how do we then manage that within the workplace, that both provides safety and safeguarding for everybody, customers, staff, but also provides that helping framework to say to people that this is what you can do about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, just to add to that and echo what I've said before as well, it's not about black and white. So I think, if people are like, I'm either addicted or I'm not, I don't think you have to identify in one of those ways. You can also say, I think I might just have a problem, or I'm struggling with something, because it doesn't mean that, you've had to attend work under the influence or be, in a certain way to say,
it's just
I think I've got a problem.
Isn't it? Negative behaviour going on.
I'm mindful that we've talked a lot, so maybe we'll link some resources to this.
Yes,
because I think there's probably, as you've talked about, signposting for help. There's loads of support out there, and
there is. There's loads, and again, it starts with a conversation. And I've always said, I'm very open to, if anyone ever wants to just drop me a message, and more than happy to have a very confidential chat with anybody that either thinks they're struggling, or I've got people in and around their lives or the workforce that are struggling. Then I'm more than happy to have a chat about it.
Me too. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.